Good evening, good evening, good evening, and a very, very warm welcome to the second talk in the series of Speak Up for Our Planet. This is a collaboration between Rotary, specifically the Rotary Club of Gerrards Cross and Chalfont St Peter, and Toastmasters, specifically Chiltern Speakers in Beaconsfield. But we have big ambitions. Rotary is a worldwide organization, and so is Toastmasters. And the subject, climate change and the environment, is a global issue. So as far as we're concerned, there are no limits to what we can do. The main purpose of Speak Up for Our Planet is to encourage you, everybody, to read, to listen, to learn, and to talk about the issues that are facing us with the environment, so that we all get more wised up and we all get more interested in doing what we can possibly do. And in fact, that subject, what can I do, is the one subject that most people have been contacting me about. Please, please, they've said, can your talks all include something that I could do? So I hope they all will. And I have actually added a page onto the website, the Speak Up for Our Planet website, which is called What Can I Do? And I would really appreciate it if you'd have a look at it and give us feedback about the things that you feel we should add to that page to give people information and to help people to learn. So that's enough about Speak Up for Our Planet. You're looking forward to our speaker. His name is Ben Griffiths. He is a member of a Toastmasters club called Riverside Communicators in Twickenham. And he is a National Trust Park Ranger for Osterley Park, which is on the edge of London. So what better person to speak to us about the wildlife of the urban jungle? I would like to introduce Ben Griffiths.
I would like to start this presentation with a story. As Jane just said, I'm a National Trust Park Ranger at Osterley Park on the edges of West London. And a few weeks ago, a visitor came up to me and asked, "Tell me, what's the best tree to plant?" Well, how do you even answer that question? I asked him, what did you have in mind? Is this something that's going to look nice in the garden? Is this for timber production or fruit production? Or do you want to attract wildlife? And at that moment, he started laughing like a cavalier. He said, "Ha, ha, ha! I have land in the Highlands of Scotland, much more land than you have here. And we already have lots of wildlife, much better wildlife than you have here." All right, mate. No one likes to show off. It turned out he was interested in something that would screen his house off from a nearby footpath. And I suggested maybe a nice tall hawthorn hedge. But that's not the point. What is the point is his assertion that wherever he lived in the Highlands of Scotland was better for wildlife than Osterley Park, West London. And I'm not convinced that's necessarily true. I get why he might think it was true. After all, we all have this narrative that our countryside is a green, pleasant wonderland for wildlife, whereas our towns and cities are urban deserts populated only by concrete, pigeons, and rats. So tonight, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take you on a walk, a virtual walk around my local area, just to point out some of the wildlife highlights that we have here and some of the wildlife highlights that might be found in towns and cities near you, as well as trying to convince you that our towns and cities can actually be very good places for wildlife. But before we do that, I have a sneaky little quiz to give you all. So what I'm going to do, once I work out how to share the screen, what I'm going to do is I am going to show you eight plants or animal species, and all I want you to do is tell me in the chat which of those 8 you think you can find in London. So 8 plant and animal species I'm going to show you. Which 8 can you find in London? Is everyone ready for that? Cool. So let's begin. Number 1, adder. Number 2, nightingale. Number 3, otter. Number 4, Adonis blue butterfly. Number 5, barn owl. Number 6, badger. Number 7, bee orchid. Number 8, kingfisher. So there we are. 8 species right there for you to see. All you have to do is tell me which of those do you think, or how many of those do you think we get in London? Let's see. How are we doing? Oh, clever people. Yes. Yep, we've got a few answers. So, okie dokie. So, we've got a few discrepancies. Helen Phillips has a particularly interesting answer. They can all be seen provided we are outside of the M25. Which is perfectly true. You can also see a few of you have worked out my trick question. They can all be seen within the M25 and within London, just about. I'll run through the answers very quickly. So adder, there's 3 or 4 sites in London where you can see adder. I'll get onto that later. Nightingale, that's a bit of a cheat because it's a migratory bird. So theoretically, it could turn up anywhere in London. But a tiny handful, I think 10 breeding pairs, do nest in London in various woods and thick scrubland areas. Otter, again, a bit of a cheat, but they've been seen on the very fringes of London, on the River Lee and also on the River Colne. One was found dead on the side of a road after being hit by a car just on the edges of West London. So they're definitely around the edges. And I suspect a decade or 2, you'll start seeing them nudging down the River Lee or along the River Thames with a bit of luck. You get them in other towns and cities. Thetford was well known for its urban otters a few years ago. I'm not sure if it still is. Wiltshire has been, Winchester even, not Wiltshire, has been well known for its urban otters for quite some time now. Of course, both of those places are smaller than London. Adonis blue butterfly and bee orchid. Yes, they can both be found Hutchinson's Bank Nature Reserve in South London in Croydon, just where the North Downs touches London. Barn owl, we see them occasionally at Osterley Park. Not often, but they're around. Badger, so they're definitely around. I suspect there's badger sets in all the outer boroughs of London. The most famous badger set, of course, is the one at Kew Gardens, but I suspect you definitely get 2 in Ealing Borough. It's just that they keep it quiet where they are for obvious reasons. And kingfisher, you find them all through London, really. Wherever you get clean water and enough fish, you're bound to see a kingfisher eventually. Now, I promised you a tour of my local area, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to have a hang about. Slight technical issues. Stop sharing and start sharing again. Excuse me 1 second. There we are. So yes, I promise you a guided tour of my local area, and that's what I'm going to do. We're going to have a walk along part of the River Crane. The River Crane flows through West London, rises in near Harrow, and flows past Southall, past Hounslow and Heathrow, past Twickenham, and then hits the River Thames near Isleworth. get a slightly better view of it from this aerial photo. The sliver of green, just where that red arrow is, that's all the River Crane there. So we're going to start in Crane Park down here. The Crane at this point is surrounded by a thin layer of woodland on either side, and the river here is both clear and brimming in life, which is something of a miracle when you consider how dirty London's waters used to be. By the mid-20th century, the River Thames was considered to be so polluted, it was viewed as being ecologically dead. And most of London's other rivers, including the Crane, were not much better. I'm pleased to say things are a little better now. 20 species of fish, over 20 species of fish, have been recorded in the Crane in recent years, including dace, perch, and minnow, all of which have an aversion for dirty waters. And it's not just fish taking advantage of the nice clean waters either. There's a whole host of aquatic insects in the Crane, as well as frogs and newts, and also wetland birds. Little egret, kingfisher, and grey wagtail can all be found along the Crane. Whilst the Crane's a lot cleaner than it used to be, cleaner is not the same as clean. And like all urban rivers, it suffers from pollution incidents. The worst one happened in 2011. Some Thames Water engineers were carrying out routine work on a sewage pipe when one of the valves within the sewage pipe slammed shut. Sewage began to back up through the pipe, and the engineers could not get the valve open. Instead, they decided to pump out the sewage into lorries and to remove it that way to sewage treatment works. Unfortunately, they were not able to do this fast enough, and were faced with the choice of either letting the whole system back up and Heathrow flood with raw sewage, or opening the substorm drains and flushing the whole lot out into the River Crane. They chose the second option, and this was the result. Over 3,000 fish are known to have died, and who knows how many other species of insect, amphibian, reptile, and mammal. I'd like to say that's the only pollution incident in recent years, but while it's certainly the worst, there's been many other smaller ones. Between 2014 and 2015, the Environment Agency recorded 28 separate incidents of pollution. Luckily, most of them were minor and didn't do much damage, but there's definitely room for improvement there with the River Crane. But let's not dwell on such gloomy matters. Let's head upstream. And you may soon notice large boulders and brushwood barriers across the river. They're there for a reason. They're there as part of a river restoration project. The River Crane, like many urban rivers, has become heavily modified over the last few centuries. It's by people. It's been widened in places, straightened in places. You can see on this picture, there's an artificial bank on the other side, a wooden bank there. So, to increase a bit of diversity into the river, the Crane Valley Partnership, a group of different organisations and councils, have begun a river restoration project. They've put in large boulders and brushwood barriers to help redirect the flow of the river, creating shallow gravel areas suitable for fish to spawn, as well as quiet backwaters like the one you see here. Good places for small aquatic invertebrates and fish fry to hide away, as well as being good places for wetland plants, such as, from left to right, purple loosestrife and marsh marigold, both of which can be seen along the River Crane at the right times of year. It's a nice place to linger, but let's carry on going for a little bit upstream. We'll soon come to one of the jewels in the crown of the River Crane, Crane Park Island, a nature reserve run and owned by London Wildlife Trust. The island is home to many animals, but there's one in particular we are here to try and spot. The water vole, one of Britain's fastest declining mammals. According to the People's Trust for Endangered Species, the water vole used to be found in virtually every waterway in the UK. It's now become extinct in 90% of its former sites. On the River Crane itself, numbers were decimated after the 2011 pollution incident, and numbers were only just recovering when a mink arrived on the River Crane. For those who don't know, mink are a relative of the weasel. They're originally from North America, but have either escaped and or been released in many places in the UK and are in quite a few British waterways. They're voracious hunters and just about small enough to fit into a water vole's burrow. Before long, in 2018, water voles have vanished from the whole length of the River Crane, with the exception of the tiny, tiny colony still holding on in the Crane Park Island Nature Reserve. Luckily, as far as I know, mink have been removed from the River Crane, and water voles have been sighted on both the nearby Duke of Northumberland's River and the Longford River, which does give you a bit of hope that maybe soon you'll be able to see water voles along the length of the River Crane, as you could in the early 2000s. Let's carry on going a little bit more upstream. We have to leave the river behind for just a short while to enter an area of rough grassland and tangled scrub. We're on the edge of Feltham Marshall Yards, a former railway depot, long abandoned and now slowly being reclaimed by nature. It might not look like much, but the soils here are poor and thin, which is a blessing in disguise, as it means plants like nettles and brambles struggle to dominate in quite the same way they would do in more nutrient-rich soils. The result is a nice patchwork quilt, if you go at the right time of year, of a whole variety of different wildflowers. Nothing rare, but things like birds from left to right, bird's foot trefoil, yarrow, knapweed, and viper's bugloss. The marshalling yards are a brownfield site, and we tend to look down our noses a bit at brownfield sites. We tend to view them as rubble-strewn wastelands that are only really suitable for tangles of bramble and bored teenagers. And many are just that, but some of our brownfield sites are excellent places for wildlife. I'll take you just for a second away from the River Crane and to East London. For many years in the 60s, waste ash from coal-fired power stations was dumped all along the banks of the River Lee, leaving a grey, desolate landscape. Before long, however, the area was colonised by orchids, taking advantage of the lack of competition and the poor soil. And the area is now a much treasured part of the Lee Valley Regional Park. And there's many other brownfield sites across the country in a similar position. But enough of East London, let's get back to West London and the Crane. We'll leave the marshalling yards behind and head underneath the railway line, back to the River Crane. The opposite bank of the River Crane contains Hounslow Heath, an area men like Dick Turpin, but now famous for its reptile species. 4 of the 6 native reptile species in the UK can all be found on Hounslow Heath. These are, from left to right, slowworm, grass snake, common lizard, and most famously of all, the adder. Adders were reintroduced onto Hounslow Heath a couple of decades ago, and they have thrived there, so much so that they've now spread beyond the heath itself to various gardens just outside. If you dig into a compost heap in Hounslow, you might just find Britain's only venomous snake staring back at you. Which is good news, because in other parts of the UK, adders are not doing anywhere near as well. According to the Amphibian and Reptile Conservation Trust, adders are fast declining. Although they're still widespread throughout the UK, they're declining in 90% of the sites, which makes the ones in Hounslow even more special. Whilst it's good news for adders on Hounslow Heath, other species are not doing so well. From left to right, skylark and stonechat are both birds species that like rough grassland and heathland. So they should be thriving on Hounslow Heath, but they're not. The problem is that both birds nest on or close to the ground and are easily disturbed by too many people or too many dogs. And we have a lot of people and dogs on Hounslow Heath. As a result, neither bird has nested there for years. And that is a pattern that's repeating throughout London. Both birds are clinging on as nesting species in London in just a few sites, and we face the real risk that we'll lose both as nesting species in London within the next couple of decades. Let's retrace our steps for a second, away from the heath and back to the river. We're going to head further upriver to Donkey Wood. Here, the Duke of Northumberland's river meets the River Crane, and where the two rivers meet, you'll find a mill pond. This mill pond is where I'm going to finish this walk and leave you. But before I do, I just want to say a few things. The Crane's my local river, but until this year, I'd never really visited it. I enjoy bird watching and I enjoy walking. And unlike that visitor I mentioned at the very start of this presentation, I knew that urban areas could be very, very good for wildlife. And yet, if I wanted to do some bird watching, I'd head out of London to, say, the North Kent Marshes or Otmore in Oxfordshire. If I wanted to do a big walk, I'd head to the South Downs, or I'd head to the Chiltern Hills. And then lockdown happened. And like many people, my world shrunk considerably. March and April this year were unpleasant and scary months for many of us, I think. And like many of us, I was feeling a little low. And normally, when feeling sad, one of my main coping mechanisms is to work for a weekend or a day off and head for a nice bit of countryside outside of London and just go for a walk. All of a sudden, that wasn't really an option. So I started looking into local walks I could do. It was the first time I'd ever visited Donkey Wood, although it was only half a mile or so from my house. And I remember seeing that mill pond for the first time and thinking how pretty it looked. and how rural. For a minute or two, I could have been anywhere in the UK. So in many ways, the crane has been a lifeline these last 6 months. And every time I walk along it, I see something new and brilliant. So I'd just like to end this talk with one big ask of everyone. See, it's easy to prioritize the rare and the exotic over the commonplace and the local. So it's easy to ignore the wonders that you find on your doorstep. So all I'm going to ask of you is that you stop and take a moment just to look around and see what's on your doorstep. Take a walk down that footpath you pass every day on your way to work. Have an explore in the woods at the back of the park, at the bottom of the street near your house. Get the map out and plan your next local adventure. I promise you, you will see wonders. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Ben. That was great. I'm just going to change the view on my machine so I could see everyone. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I found it fascinating, and I found Ben to be an engaging speaker as well. He, I know, would be very happy if you would ask questions. So please feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like to speak. It's probably better to keep yourself muted most of the time because people have dogs and telephones that ring and that kind of stuff. But please do feel free to either ask a question in the chat or to unmute yourself and ask away. Who would like to ask a question? Carol is asking, Carol Kim McKenna is asking, thank you so much, and I agree. Hang on, I need to have a look at the chat properly. Thank you so much, and I agree. During lockdown, I've been amazed at the wildlife in my own garden. Question from Karina, how can I defend my urban foxes when people say they belong in the countryside?
I presume when, Karina, when you say defend, we're talking about explaining why foxes are great rather than actually physically defending them. So that's what I'm going with, but feel free to let me know if that's not what you mean. I would, yes, I would probably go about by explaining, I would probably go about by explaining how interesting foxes are. I'd probably go down the line of why they're in towns and cities in the first place, which is how adaptable foxes can be and how they're adapting to what is essentially a fairly new habitat for them. Urban, especially big urban areas, have only really been kicking around since 1800s. Before then, towns and cities were pretty tiny, really. So I just explained that foxes are just taking care of a new ecological niche, really, and go along the lines of how adaptable and clever foxes can be. A few of the problems people have with foxes is, well, one is the cat problem. They do sometimes clash, and occasionally cats get injured by foxes. So if that comes up, you would probably go down the route of just hitting them with some statistics. I do not know those statistics off the top of my head, but I do know that statistically it's relatively uncommon for cats and foxes to fight. I mean, they do fight, and cats do get injured sometimes, but quite often the cats start the fight, and quite often they come off best, actually. The other problem people have with foxes is them coming into the gardens, making a mess, digging things up, etc., etc., etc. And I'd just go down the route of, isn't it great you've got these really cool and charismatic species in your garden. Hey, who knows? Maybe they'll be under the hedge or the shade, and they'll have babies. Fox cubs in the garden are amazing.
They are. They are. We had some. They're gorgeous.
Yeah. You're never going to win everyone over, sadly. What other questions do we have?
Okay, I've got another question. Leslie says, would you recommend digging a pond in the garden at this time of year?
Yes, any time of year is good for digging a pond. I'd avoid winter because the ground's likely to be frozen then, and it's likely to be a pain in the neck. But yeah, I'd definitely recommend digging a pond. The one drawback might be there might not be so many water plants around at the moment for you to buy to put in it. But yeah, definitely go for a pond if you can. If you can, get one with a variety of, dig one with a variety of depths. Yeah, nice shallow sides if possible, just so that if anything like a hedgehog or anything like that falls, then they can get out again, because that's kind of heartbreaking, waking up one morning finding a dead hedgehog floating in your pond. Yeah, I'd definitely recommend it. Yeah. Yeah. What else have we got?
Helen Phillips would like to ask a question.
Oh, hello, Helen Phillips. Go for it. Oh, you need to unmute yourself.
Unmute yourself, Helen.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. I live on the edge of a small town, not very far from the edges of London and very close to the M25, which is why I had that in my head. And if I walk over the hill behind my house, at night I can hear foxes barking.
Yeah.
That's fine. I'm quite happy with that. During the day, I can sometimes see the muntjac deer.
Oh, yeah.
And they sort of gamble all over, certainly when my dog isn't around. They don't like him particularly. No. But I've also spotted some slightly larger deer. Would those be the roe deer?
Probably, yes. So your options for deer, if it's only slightly larger, I think roe deer is the most likely. I think Chinese water deer are pretty much the same size as muntjac, and I think they're.
I wouldn't recognise a Chinese water deer.
They're very similar. I'm not sure I would either. They're very similar to muntjac. I think they're mainly restricted to the East Anglia though. Okay. And fallow and sika are obviously quite a bit bigger than muntjac, so probably roe deer. Does it have a little black nose? Yeah, that's a little.
Yeah, because they look quite cute.
Yeah. Probably roe deer. Yeah, probably roe deer. That's a good spot.
But there are, I think there's less than when I moved here 10 years ago. But that's hardly surprising because it's got more built up and more people with dogs.
Yeah, more people, more dogs, more cars. It is an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the downsides of urbanization is like habitat fragmentation. So yeah, very possibly.
Okay, we have another question. Carol Kim McKenna says, how can I encourage visiting hedgehogs to hibernate in my garden? I have put a house with straw.
Cool.
Is that the end of the question? Yeah.
Yeah. So, yes. So hopefully you have hedgehogs sort of in the local area. Otherwise, you're sadly on a hiding to nothing. But let's assume that's the case, and you got hedgehogs. Sorry, you got hedgehogs in the area. A few things you can do. First, make sure hedgehogs can get into your garden. If you have a hedge or a gap underneath a fence, you're laughing. If it's one of those solid wooden fences, you're obviously going to struggle. What's quite popular at the moment is cutting out a little hole just for hedgehogs to move in and out. So that will be useful. Yeah, in terms of encouraging them, there's various things you can do. Just making sure you have a nice variety of stuff in your garden is useful. Obviously, hedgehogs eat a variety of things, eat a lot of insects. So a garden. An update. Carol Kim McKenna, she's been feeding two that started visiting the garden this summer. Wicked. They're definitely around. I think, to be honest, you've cracked it more or less. A hedgehog house with straw in it is not a bad sign. What you'll probably find, what I always find with wildlife, is it'll probably hibernate somewhere right next to the hedgehog house and totally ignore this thing you've bought for a lot of money. But yeah, that's definitely a good start. Compost heaps are good. You quite often find them nesting and sometimes hibernating in compost heaps. If you have one of those, you're laughing. The old pile of leaf left at the back of like a flower bed, something like that. They're all good places. But yeah, an area with a house with straw in it, I think, could be a winner. Nice area under a shed. That's another good spot for a hedgehog to hibernate. Just anywhere where the ambient temperature is a bit warmer than the outside, essentially. But yeah, I think you're onto a good start there. I'd say see if they hibernate this year in your house of straw, and if not, you'll maybe have to do something else. But it's definitely a good start.
Ben, can I ask you something? If hedgehogs are inclined to hibernate in compost heaps,
Yeah.
should we be careful not to disturb a compost heap in the winter?
Yeah, probably. I haven't really thought about that. It's probably sensible to, if you can. If you can't, there's nothing you can do about it. But if possible, then it's probably sensible. I mean, they'll probably be fine, but all it does mean is, because when you're hibernating, obviously you're going to torpor, everything slows down, heart rate, breathing, metabolism, all that sort of thing. So if you wake up too many times, obviously you're using a lot of energy and might not make it through. To be honest, if you do disturb them once, it's probably not the end of the world. They'll probably just burrow further down, and then you just know not to bother them again. But yeah, if you can possibly help it, it makes sense, I guess.
Does anybody else want to ask Ben anything? I don't see any hands up, and I don't see anything else in the chat. Okay, in that case, thank you so much, Ben.
No worries.
For coming, although you didn't come, for talking to us about wildlife in the urban jungle. And I certainly didn't realize there were so many snakes, and I will definitely be going for a walk in my local area very soon. Thank you very much indeed. That was great.
No problem.
Give you a round of
Thank you very much for having me.